The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her gear for what seemed like another routine patrol. At 24, she had already served 3 tours overseas, but nothing could have prepared her for what this day would bring. Her commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, was a respected officer known for his strategic mind and unwavering dedication to his troops. Maria had grown up in a small Texas town where her father worked as a mechanic and her mother taught elementary school. From a young age, she displayed an unusual combination of fierce determination and protective instincts. When her younger brother was bullied at school, Maria didn't hesitate to step in, even though she was smaller than most of his tormentors. Her parents often joked that she was born with a shield instead of a heart, always ready to protect those she cared about. The decision to join the military came naturally to Maria. She wanted to serve her country and protect others on a larger scale. During basic training, her instructors quickly noticed her exceptional courage and tactical awareness. She never sought recognition or praise, but her actions consistently demonstrated an extraordinary willingness to put others before herself. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had been watching Maria's career with interest. He had seen many soldiers come and go, but there was something special about her dedication and instinctive protective nature. She never complained about difficult assignments and always volunteered for the most dangerous missions. Her fellow soldiers respected her not because she demanded it, but because she earned it through her consistent actions and unwavering loyalty. The intelligence reports that morning indicated increased insurgent activity in their sector. The area had been relatively quiet for weeks, which made everyone nervous. In warfare, quiet often meant that something big was being planned. The local population had become increasingly distant, and there were reports of suspicious movements in the surrounding hills. As the patrol prepared to move out, Maria noticed the tension in the air. The usual chatter among the soldiers was subdued, and everyone seemed more alert than usual. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell gathered his team for a final briefing, emphasizing the importance of staying vigilant and following protocol. He had a feeling that this patrol would be different from the others. The convoy consisted of 3 armored vehicles carrying 12 soldiers. Maria was positioned in the second vehicle, with Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell in the lead vehicle. The route they were taking had been used many times before, but recent intelligence suggested that insurgents might have planted improvised explosive devices along some of the commonly used paths. As they moved through the dusty streets of the village, Maria kept her eyes scanning the rooftops and windows. Children watched from doorways, but unlike previous patrols, they didn't wave or smile. The absence of normal activity was unsettling. Even the local market, which was usually bustling with activity, seemed eerily quiet. The radio crackled with routine check-ins as the convoy made its way toward their destination. Maria's training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was telling her that something was wrong. She adjusted her position to get a better view of the surrounding area and checked her weapon one more time. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's voice came through the radio, calm and professional as always. He was updating headquarters on their progress and estimated time of arrival at the checkpoint they were supposed to inspect. The mission seemed straightforward enough, but in this environment, even the simplest tasks could quickly become life-threatening situations. The heat was already becoming oppressive, even though it was still early in the day. Maria wiped the sweat from her forehead and took a sip of water from her canteen. She thought about her family back home and the letter she had written to her parents the night before. She always wrote letters before potentially dangerous missions, just in case something happened. As the convoy approached a narrow section of the road flanked by abandoned buildings, Maria felt her heart rate increase. This was exactly the kind of location where ambushes typically occurred. The buildings provided perfect cover for attackers, and the narrow road made it difficult for the vehicles to maneuver quickly if they came under fire. Her eyes continued to scan the area methodically, looking for anything out of place. A glint of metal in a second-story window caught her attention, but it disappeared before she could get a better look. She keyed her radio to report the potential threat, but before she could speak, the world around her exploded into chaos. The first shots rang out like thunder, shattering the tense silence that had settled over the convoy. Maria's training kicked in immediately as she identified the source of the gunfire, coming from multiple positions in the surrounding buildings. The insurgents had planned this ambush carefully. positioning themselves to create a deadly crossfire that would trap the convoy in the narrow street. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's voice came through the radio, clear and commanding despite the chaos erupting around them. He was directing the convoy's response, trying to coordinate their movement to a more defensible position. But the enemy had chosen their location well, and the vehicles were caught in an area with limited options for escape or cover. Maria could see muzzle flashes from at least 4 different windows in the buildings on both sides of the street. The sound of bullets striking the armored vehicles created a terrifying symphony of metallic impacts. She returned fire toward the nearest threat while simultaneously assessing the tactical situation and looking for ways to help her fellow soldiers. The driver of her vehicle was trying to maneuver closer to the lead vehicle where Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell was positioned. Through the thick bulletproof glass, Maria could see that the commander's vehicle had taken heavy fire and appeared to be having mechanical problems. Smoke was beginning to pour from under the hood, and the vehicle was slowing down significantly. The radio traffic was intense as soldiers called out enemy positions and coordinated their defensive response. Maria could hear the strain in her comrades' voices as they fought to maintain control of the situation. The insurgents had clearly been planning this attack for some time, and they had chosen their moment when the convoy was most vulnerable. Suddenly, Maria noticed something that made her blood run cold. A figure had appeared on a rooftop directly above Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle, and he was carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The weapon was aimed directly at the commander's position, and from that angle, the armored vehicle's protection would be minimal. Without hesitation, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She grabbed her rifle and prepared to exit her vehicle, knowing that staying inside meant watching her commander and several fellow soldiers die. The other soldiers in her vehicle shouted warnings, but Maria was already moving. Her only thought was getting to Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell before the insurgent could fire his weapon. The distance between the 2 vehicles was approximately 30 meters, but it might as well have been 30 miles given the amount of gunfire filling the air. Maria knew that crossing that open space would expose her to fire from multiple directions. But she also knew that Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's survival depended on someone creating a distraction or eliminating the immediate threat above him. As she prepared to leave the relative safety of her vehicle, Maria thought about all the training exercises she had completed. None of them had prepared her for the raw terror and adrenaline she was feeling at this moment, but her training had prepared her for the tactical aspects of what she needed to do, and her natural protective instincts were driving her forward. The door of her vehicle swung open, and Maria rolled out into the street, immediately seeking what little cover was available from a damaged concrete barrier. The sound of gunfire was deafening, and she could feel the heat from bullets passing close to her position. The acrid smell of gunpowder and burning fuel filled her nostrils as she assessed her next move. From her new position, she had a clear view of the rooftop where the insurgent with the RPG was preparing to fire. She also had a better view of Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle, and could see that he was trying to coordinate the defense while dealing with his vehicle's mechanical problems. The smoke from his engine was getting thicker, which meant they would soon lose their mobile cover entirely. Maria raised her rifle and took careful aim at the figure on the rooftop. The distance was challenging, especially under these conditions, but she had always been an exceptional marksman. She controlled her breathing and waited for the right moment, knowing that she would likely only get one shot before the insurgent noticed her position and adjusted his own. The weight of the moment pressed down on her as she realized that the lives of her commander and several other soldiers depended on her accuracy in the next few seconds. The insurgent was almost ready to fire his weapon, and Maria could see that he had a clear shot at Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's position. Time seemed to slow down as she made the final adjustments to her aim and prepared to squeeze the trigger. Everything that had led to this moment, all of her training, all of her experiences, all of her natural protective instincts had prepared her for this single shot that would determine whether her commander lived or died. The chaos around her seemed to fade into the background as she focused entirely on the target and the task that lay before her. Maria's finger tightened on the trigger, just as the insurgent began to lower his aim toward Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle. The crack of her rifle cut through the chaos of the firefight, and she watched as her shot found its mark. The insurgent dropped his weapon and disappeared from view. But Maria knew that eliminating one threat didn't end the danger her commander was facing. More gunfire erupted from other positions, and Maria realized that the insurgents had backup plans for their ambush. She could see additional figures moving on the rooftops, and it became clear that this was a much larger and more coordinated attack than anyone had anticipated. The enemy had prepared multiple layers of assault, and they were determined to inflict maximum casualties on the convoy. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle was now completely immobilized, with thick black smoke pouring from the engine compartment. Maria could see through the bulletproof windows that the commander was trying to maintain radio contact with headquarters while directing the defensive actions of his scattered team. His calm professionalism under fire was inspiring his soldiers, but Maria knew that his stationary position made him an easy target. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The convoy's vehicles were separated and under fire from multiple directions, making it difficult to provide mutual support. Maria realized that her commander's vehicle was becoming a death trap, and unless something changed quickly, the insurgents would eventually overwhelm their position through sheer persistence and superior numbers. Maria made another split-second decision that would define her military career. Instead of returning to the relative safety of her own vehicle, she began moving toward Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's position. The distance was still significant, and the amount of gunfire between her current location and her commander made the journey extremely dangerous. But she couldn't abandon him. Using every piece of cover available, Maria began her advance. She moved from the concrete barrier to an abandoned vehicle, then to a pile of rubble, each movement calculated to minimize her exposure to enemy fire. The insurgents had noticed her movement and were beginning to focus their attention on her position, but this also meant they were paying less attention to Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell. The sound of her own heartbeat seemed to compete with the gunfire as Maria continued her advance. She could hear bullets striking the surfaces around her, and several times she felt the heat of rounds passing dangerously close to her body. But her determination to reach her commander drove her forward, even as her rational mind told her that what she was attempting was nearly impossible. Halfway to Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's position, Maria encountered a problem that threatened to end her rescue attempt. A group of insurgents had positioned themselves in a building directly between her current location and her commander's vehicle. They had a clear field of fire that would make further advance impossible without dealing with this immediate threat. Maria found herself pinned down behind a damaged wall with limited options. She could retreat to her original position, but that would mean abandoning her commander to whatever fate the insurgents had planned. She could try to go around the building, but that would expose her to fire from other directions and would take precious time that Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell might not have. The radio traffic indicated that other members of the patrol were also in difficult positions, and backup was still several minutes away. Maria realized that she was probably the only person in a position to help her commander, and the window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The insurgents were becoming more organized in their assault, and it was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed the convoy's defenses. Looking at the building blocking her path, Maria noticed that there was a side entrance that appeared to be partially concealed by debris. If she could get inside the building, she might be able to eliminate the insurgents from an unexpected angle, and then continue her advance to Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's position. It was an extremely risky plan, but given the circumstances, risk seemed to be the only option available. Maria checked her ammunition and equipment one more time before beginning her approach to the building. She knew that once she entered the structure, she would be fighting in close quarters against an unknown number of enemies. Her training had prepared her for urban combat, but the reality of fighting inside a building while her commander's life hung in the balance added a level of pressure she had never experienced before. The approach to the building required crossing another open area, but Maria had noticed that the insurgents' attention seemed to be focused on Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle and the other convoy positions. She waited for a moment when the enemy fire seemed to be concentrated elsewhere, then made her move toward the side entrance. As she reached the entrance to the building, Maria could hear voices inside speaking in a language she didn't understand, but the tone was urgent and aggressive. She knew that the insurgents inside were probably planning their next assault on her commander's position, and she had to act quickly to prevent them from carrying out whatever they had planned. Maria took a deep breath and prepared to enter the building, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether she could save Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and turn the tide of this deadly ambush. Maria slipped through the side entrance of the building, her rifle raised and ready as she moved into the darkened interior. The contrast between the bright sunlight outside and the shadows inside momentarily affected her vision, but her training had prepared her for this type of transition. She moved slowly and deliberately, using the walls for support while her eyes adjusted to the lighting conditions. The voices she had heard were coming from the floor above her current position. Maria could make out at least 3 different speakers, and their tone suggested they were coordinating an attack on Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle. Through the broken windows above, she could see muzzle flashes as the insurgents continued their assault on the convoy below. The staircase leading to the upper floor was partially damaged, with several steps missing and debris scattered throughout. Maria tested each step carefully as she climbed, knowing that any noise could alert the insurgents to her presence and eliminate the element of surprise that was crucial to her success. The old building creaked and groaned under the stress of the ongoing battle, adding to the tension of her ascent. As she reached the upper floor, Maria could see the insurgents positioned at different windows, their attention focused entirely on the targets below. They had established an effective firing position that gave them clear shots at Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's immobilized vehicle, and they seemed confident that their plan was working. None of them appeared to be watching for threats from within the building. Maria counted 4 insurgents on the upper floor, each armed with automatic weapons and positioned to maximize their coverage of the street below. They had additional ammunition and what appeared to be more explosive devices, suggesting that they were prepared for an extended engagement. The situation was even more serious than Maria had initially realized. Moving carefully to avoid detection, Maria positioned herself where she could engage multiple targets quickly. She knew that once she fired the first shot, the element of surprise would be lost, and she would have to move fast to prevent the insurgents from regrouping and returning fire. Her plan was to eliminate as many threats as possible in the first few seconds, then adapt based on how the situation developed. The first insurgent was positioned at a window directly overlooking Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle. Maria could see that he was preparing to throw what appeared to be a grenade, which would likely be devastating to anyone in or near the commander's position. This target had to be eliminated immediately, regardless of the risk to her own position. Maria took careful aim and fired, her shot finding its mark and eliminating the immediate threat to her commander. The other insurgents spun around in confusion, trying to locate the source of the unexpected gunfire. Maria was already moving to her next position, using the layout of the building to her advantage as she engaged the remaining threats. The firefight inside the building was intense, but brief. Maria's training and determination gave her the advantage she needed to overcome the insurgents, who had been caught off guard by her unexpected arrival. Within minutes, she had eliminated the threats on the upper floor and secured the building. But she knew that her mission was far from complete. From her new position in the building, Maria had a much better view of the overall tactical situation. She could see that Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle was surrounded by debris, and that smoke was now completely obscuring the interior. She couldn't tell if her commander was injured or if he was still able to coordinate the defense of the convoy. The radio traffic indicated that the other vehicles in the convoy were also under heavy fire, and several soldiers had been wounded. Backup was still several minutes away, and the insurgents seemed to have additional fighters positioned throughout the area. Maria realized that clearing this one building had only eliminated part of the threat facing her unit. Looking down at Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle from her elevated position, Maria could see that the commander was indeed still alive and trying to maintain communication with his scattered team. However, his position was becoming increasingly untenable as more insurgents moved to surround the disabled vehicle. She had to get to him quickly before the enemy could complete their encirclement. Maria's route to the commander's position was now clearer, but it still required crossing open ground while under fire from multiple directions. She gathered additional ammunition from the insurgents she had defeated and prepared for what she knew would be the most dangerous part of her rescue mission. The distance was shorter now, but the intensity of the enemy fire had increased significantly. Before leaving the building, Maria used her radio to contact Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell directly. His voice was strained but steady as he acknowledged her transmission and updated her on his situation. He had been wounded in the initial assault, but he was still functional and still commanding his team. However, his vehicle was completely disabled and he needed immediate extraction. Maria informed her commander that she was moving to his position and asked him to be ready to move quickly once she reached him. She also updated the other members of the patrol on her intentions, knowing that they would need to provide covering fire for her final approach to the disabled vehicle. As she prepared to leave the building and make her final dash to Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's position, Maria reflected on the series of decisions that had brought her to this moment. Every choice she had made since the ambush began had been driven by her determination to protect her commander and her fellow soldiers, regardless of the personal risk involved. Maria burst from the building and sprinted toward Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's vehicle, her rifle ready as she crossed the deadly open ground. The other members of her patrol had heard her radio transmission and were providing covering fire, but the insurgents were still managing to maintain a dangerous level of fire in her direction. Every step brought her closer to her commander, but also deeper into the heart of the ambush zone. Bullets struck the pavement around her feet as she ran, sending up small clouds of dust and concrete fragments. Maria could feel the heat of rounds passing close to her body, but her focus remained entirely on reaching Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's position. The distance that had seemed so great before was now shrinking rapidly, and she could see her commander's face through the bulletproof glass of his vehicle. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell was indeed wounded, with blood visible on his uniform, but he was still alert and still trying to coordinate the defense of his patrol. When he saw Maria approaching his position, his expression showed both admiration for her courage and concern for her safety. He began preparing to exit his vehicle, knowing that staying inside the disabled transport would eventually prove fatal. As Maria reached the vehicle, she immediately began assessing the tactical situation around Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's position. The insurgents had not yet completed their encirclement, but they were close and several enemy fighters were moving through the surrounding buildings to cut off any escape routes. She had arrived just in time, but their window of opportunity for escape was rapidly closing. Maria helped Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell exit his vehicle, noting that his leg wound was more serious than she had initially realized. He was able to walk, but his mobility was significantly limited, which would make their escape more challenging. She quickly applied a field dressing to his wound while scanning the area for threats and planning their route to safety. The nearest friendly position was one of the other convoy vehicles, but it was approximately 50 meters away across ground that was completely exposed to enemy fire. Maria realized that carrying or supporting her wounded commander across that distance would be extremely difficult, especially while under fire from multiple directions. She needed to find a better solution. Looking around the area, Maria noticed a series of concrete barriers and abandoned vehicles that could provide cover for a fighting withdrawal to the friendly position. The route would be longer and more complex, but it would offer better protection than trying to cross the open ground directly. She explained her plan to Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, who agreed despite his obvious pain. The radio brought news that backup was now only minutes away, but Maria knew that minutes could feel like hours in their current situation. The insurgents were becoming more aggressive in their assault, possibly because they also knew that reinforcements were approaching. The enemy was trying to inflict maximum casualties before being forced to withdraw. Maria and Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell began their movement toward safety, using every available piece of cover as they advanced. Maria led the way, checking each position before moving forward, while also helping to support her wounded commander. The combination of tactical movement and medical support required all of her training and concentration. The insurgents quickly realized what was happening and began focusing their fire on Maria and Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's position. The two soldiers found themselves pinned down behind a concrete barrier as enemy fire intensified around them. Maria returned fire while trying to identify the best route for their next movement. But the tactical situation was becoming increasingly difficult. During this critical moment, Maria made a decision that would define her legacy in the military. As insurgent fire intensified and it became clear that they were about to be overrun, she positioned herself between Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and the incoming fire. Using her own body as a shield, she absorbed the enemy assault while continuing to return fire and coordinate their defense. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell tried to protest her actions, but Maria was determined to protect her commander regardless of the personal cost. She had made a commitment to herself and to her unit that she would not allow her commanding officer to be killed or captured while she was still able to fight. Her protective instincts had taken over completely, and she was prepared to sacrifice everything to ensure his survival. The sound of approaching helicopters could now be heard in the distance, indicating that the long-awaited backup was finally arriving. But the insurgents were making one final push to eliminate the convoy before the reinforcements could intervene. The next few minutes would determine whether Maria's heroic actions would be enough to save Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and the rest of her patrol. Maria's rifle fire was precise and effective as she held off the insurgent assault, but she was also taking fire from multiple directions. She could feel the impact of bullets striking her protective equipment, and she knew that her luck couldn't hold out much longer. But she also knew that she just needed to buy a little more time for the backup to arrive and change the tactical situation in their favor. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, despite his wound, was also fighting back with his sidearm, but he was primarily focused on coordinating the overall defense and calling in the exact position for the incoming support. Maria's actions had given him the time and protection he needed to maintain command of the situation and ensure that the reinforcements would arrive at the right location. The courage and determination that Maria displayed during these critical moments would become the foundation of a legend that would inspire soldiers for generations to come. The thunderous sound of helicopter rotors filled the air as the backup forces arrived at the ambush site. Maria could see the aircraft approaching from multiple directions, their door gunners already engaging the insurgent positions with devastating effect. The tide of the battle was finally turning, but Maria maintained her protective position in front of Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell until the immediate threat was neutralized. The professional efficiency of the rescue operation was impressive to watch. Within minutes, the helicopters had established air superiority over the area, and additional ground forces were being inserted to secure the site and pursue the remaining insurgents. The coordinated assault quickly overwhelmed the enemy fighters, who began withdrawing from their positions under the pressure of superior firepower. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's wound required immediate medical attention, and Maria helped coordinate his evacuation to one of the medical helicopters that had arrived with the backup forces. As the medics worked on her commander, he grabbed Maria's hand and looked directly into her eyes. His expression conveyed a level of gratitude and respect that no words could adequately express. The aftermath of the ambush revealed the true scope of what Maria had accomplished. Intelligence analysis of the site showed that the insurgents had planned this attack for weeks, positioning fighters and weapons throughout the area to create a deadly trap for any military convoy that used this route. The enemy had expected to inflict severe casualties and capture or kill high-ranking military personnel. Maria's actions had not only saved Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's life, but had also prevented the insurgents from achieving their broader objectives. Her quick thinking and exceptional courage had disrupted their carefully planned ambush and allowed the rest of the patrol to survive until backup arrived. The tactical analysis showed that without her intervention, the entire convoy would likely have been destroyed. Word of Maria's heroic actions spread quickly throughout the military command structure. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, despite his injuries, made sure that a detailed report of her conduct was submitted to the highest levels of command. He described her actions as the most extraordinary display of courage and selfless service he had witnessed in his 20-year military career. The story of how Sergeant Maria Santos shielded her commander from incoming fire and saved his life became legendary within military circles. Other soldiers began referring to the incident as a perfect example of the values and dedication that defined the best of military service. Her actions inspired countless other service members to strive for the same level of excellence and commitment. Maria herself was characteristically modest about her actions when, interviewed by military investigators and journalists, she insisted that she had simply done what any good soldier would do in the same situation. She emphasized that the real heroes were all the members of her patrol, who had fought courageously under extremely difficult circumstances and had worked together as a team to survive the ambush. The official recognition of Maria's actions came in the form of one of the military's highest decorations for valor. The medal ceremony was attended by senior military officials and her proud family members who had traveled from Texas to witness the recognition of their daughter's extraordinary courage. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, despite still recovering from his wounds, insisted on being present to personally thank Maria for saving his life. During the ceremony, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell spoke about how Maria's actions had redefined his understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. He described her as the embodiment of the military values of honor, courage, and commitment, and he credited her with not only saving his life but also inspiring him to be a better leader and a better person. The impact of Maria's story extended far beyond the military community. News of her heroic actions reached civilian audiences, where it became a symbol of the courage and dedication displayed by service members around the world. Parents used her story to teach their children about the importance of standing up for others and putting service before self. Maria continued her military career with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her service before the ambush. She was promoted and given additional responsibilities, but she approached each new challenge with the same humble dedication that had defined her from the beginning. Her fellow soldiers looked up to her, not because she demanded respect, but because she had earned it through her actions. Years later, when Maria reflected on that day and the decisions she had made, she remained convinced that she had simply done what was right. She never regretted putting herself in harm's way to protect Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, and she continued to believe that protecting others was not just her duty as a soldier, but her responsibility as a human being. The legend of Maria Santos became a permanent part of military culture, told and retold in training schools and barracks around the world. Her story served as a reminder that true heroism is not about seeking glory or recognition, but about making the difficult choice to put others before yourself when it matters most. The day she shielded her commander from incoming fire became the day a legend was born in the ranks, inspiring generations of soldiers to follow her example of courage, dedication, and selfless service.